Hi, you guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's such a treat to be with you today. I wanted to start by telling you about the occasion when I was abducted by aliens. This happened to me in 1979 on a Sunday morning. I was I was scheduled to be the premier speaker at a post at a religious gathering. And this was after the services were over, and I was going to stand up and talk with them about the community service organization that I ran. My goals were two. I was supposed to recruit volunteers, and I was supposed to raise money. Here's what happened. The minister who was introducing me said my name, called me to the front, and suddenly I evaporated. From that moment forward, from the time that I stood up and allegedly gave a presentation and returned to my seat, I had no recollection of what I had said, how long I had spoken, how anybody reacted. It was as though I had a total out-of-body experience that I subsequently attributed to alien abduction. Now, that might sound familiar to some of you, that on some occasion you've perhaps been on your feet and discovered that you were having a difficult time being yourself and being fully conscious of your environment and being 100% in control of your performance. And so you know perhaps what that feeling is. From that moment on, that's 1979, I've been on a campaign to become a more comfortable and effective speaker. I've made a lot of progress, but I still have a long way to go. I've learned a lot of great things, and I've had the pleasure of helping other people get better with presentations as well. In particular, I've worked with folks at NASA, at the National Institutes of Health, and for 30 years, folks at NIST giving more successful presentations. One of the premier lessons I've learned, one of the first pieces of advice I have for everybody who wants to be a better speaker is join Toastmasters. So I want you to know that you've done the right thing. I've worked with tons of speakers who are also in Toastmasters, and what I find is that they all gain confidence massively. That's the big thing that folks get from Toastmasters. And because Toastmasters is so rigorous about not saying or Toastmasters participants generally do very, very well in that dimension. So I tip my hat to you. You're doing the right thing by being part of Toastmasters. I've learned dozens of other ways to make presentations better, and I want to share a couple of them with you. These are techniques that your NIST colleagues in the Standards Coordination Office are particularly enthusiastic about. The first of them is setting objectives for a presentation, which is a real dweeby, sort of dorky part of giving a presentation, but it's a big difference maker in typical and exceptional. And the second is delivering talks that other people can summarize, not merely understand, but summarize when they get back to their office for somebody who wasn't there. Now, building and delivering a talk that people can summarize is something you and I will talk about on August 13th. Today, we're going to talk about setting objectives. Before we do, though, I want to set a little bit of context for why setting objectives is an important discipline. Now let's see if I can get my content up here. Apparently not.
We can see it, Don.
Let's see. I think you see though that you see the NIST meeting room, right?
No, we see your July 16th PowerPoint slides.
Oh, you do? Okay. I don't see that for some reason, which isn't necessarily a negative.
If you have multiple screens, that's probably why you can't see it.
Oh, okay. So let's see. Let's see what that's like. Okay. I think this is going to work. How's that? You should have a white screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So today, two topics. What makes a business presentation great, and how do you set objectives for a successful talk? Now, before we get into either of those, I want to show you how an outline translates pretty conveniently into objectives. So we take these same two things, and this is what the objectives look like. When we're finished with this conversation, you'll be prepared to list 3 essential attributes of successful business talks and to describe 2 ways to set objectives for a talk. Now, when we talk about objectives, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to describe what success looks like for your talk in terms of audience behavior. If you succeed, they should be able to do something, not merely enjoy your talk, but they should take away something that makes them more effective professionally. This, by the way, is one of the big differences between a business talk and a Toastmasters talk. The Toastmasters talks are often more about the talk and the entertainment value and the execution than about the business impact. Okay, what makes a business presentation great? As you would expect, I have an answer to that question. But before I offer my answer, I want you to tell me one thing. When you see a talk at work that's terrific, and I'm sorry to say you don't see very many of them, but when you see one that's really great, tell me one thing that makes it great. Lisa?
That I can understand it on
I
the
think, okay.
layman's terms.
It's a pretty low bar, but that's good. It's understandable. Scylla, how about you? Oh, I can't hear you.
I think you mean.
Oh, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Okay. What makes a business presentation great?
I need to answer that?
Yes.
Well, that would be a long answer, probably 20 minutes.
No. One word. One word.
One word.
Mm-hmm.
Success.
Success. Okay. Good. The explanation of that will take 20 minutes. Katwa, how about you?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, what makes a business presentation great? I think if you get something actionable from it.
Okay.
I feel like a lot of business presentations are they just need you to sign off something like a safety training. Well, safety training are important, but usually they just need you to like say, hey, we told you this. But if you can take away something, I feel like that's pretty important.
Okay, good. Now, thank you. So far we have 3 really valuable contributions. That they need to be understandable, successful, and there are a host of ways to define success, and then actionable. They need to give you something to do. And bear in mind that when you're setting these standards, you're talking to yourselves, right? That the expectation is that these words represent the talks that you give. And Ms. Gopi, how about you?
Yes, I was saying that something new that I haven't learned before.
Okay, good. Something new. Fantastic. And let's say that's sort of the novelty effect, that it's stimulating, that new is fun and interesting, and same old is tedious and boring. Lovely. Thank you for your responses. Here's my answer to the same question. First is service. And this kind of goes to some of your input there, that presentations at work must be useful. They can't merely be interesting. They must be actionable. They must actually help us be more effective at work. So that's the first thing. And I like to put parenthetically in the service domain that they're also easy to understand, that the person who sees your presentation shouldn't actually have to work very hard to get the service that you're delivering. It should be an easy thing for them to get content from your talk. Next is pleasure. The talks that you love are fun. They're energizing. The worst of talks that you see are depleting, where toward the end of the talk you're wishing that it were over sooner. Please finish, rather than more. Under the best of circumstances, when a talk is finished, we say, what? Is it done so soon? I was thoroughly enjoying that, and I'd happily watch this person speak again. So now we have 2, service, pleasure, and the third is relationship. What I have in mind here is that when people see you speak, they feel good about you. And they're attracted to the possibility of having an ongoing association with you professionally. They might say to themselves, that's a person I'd like to have on my team. That's somebody I'd like to have lunch with. That's somebody I'd be happy to work with. So these are for me, the 3 hallmarks of terrific business talks: service, pleasure, and relationship. This idea of setting objectives lives in the service part of the presentation, making the presentation useful. Setting objectives is then an essential part of delivering service. I learned this, I knew this in theory. I had been taught this when I was certified as a high school teacher. And for years, doing research on presentation technique and teaching presentation technique, I always promoted the idea of creating objectives. But I'll tell you when it became really meaningful for me. I was at the I've forgotten the name of the institution. This is part of the Defense Department where they train doctors and lawyers, or excuse me, doctors and nurses to go into the field to care for casualties. It's the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Sorry for the momentary blip there. I was working with nurses there on presenting, and one of the nurses I worked with said, setting objectives is something so fundamental to nurses because a lot of us do more teaching about care than delivery care, that we teach other people how to take care of their colleagues, their friends, their family in combat situations. And she said, setting the objectives is the first part of creating any presentation about nursing. So I paid attention, and I've discovered now that it's the big difference maker between bad presentations and great presentations. So how do you do it? In my catalog, there are two handy options for setting objectives. The first is to write behavioral objectives of the sort that teachers write, and that's my favorite technique. That's the one that you and I are going to spend a few minutes on. The second is to create a quiz, and here's what I have in mind by the second, that you might say to yourself, if I could give the people who hear my talk a quiz at the end of my talk, and I could ask them somewhere between 1 and 3 questions. What would the questions be? What are the answers? And then you give a talk that's guaranteed that everybody gets an A+ on the quiz. So that's the second option here, is to create the quiz, but you and I are going to work on the first option. Here's what behavioral objectives look like. You describe the behavior that you want your participants to be capable of. The objective is not to describe what you are intending to do. So for instance, here's a bad objective for a presentation. My objective is to tell you about my work at NIST. Wrong. My objective is for you to be able to describe my work at NIST better, because I'm talking to you in terms of what I want you to be able to do, not what I'm going to do in the talk. Here's an example. Here's the basic framework. This is the framework that works every time. After my talk, my audience will be able to, and then you fill in the blank. And this is what I did for you at the beginning of my talk. At the very first PowerPoint, I said, when we're done, you will be prepared to, and then I listed 2 things. To list 3 attributes of great business talks, and to describe 2 ways to write behavioral objectives. And so here are 2 examples. These are the ones that I began with. Now, there's a trick here. The trick is the nature of the words that you use after the dots here. We want to use words that describe concrete, observable, measurable, testable behavior. So we're not going to say here, understand or appreciate. We're going to say list, discuss, list, describe. And now I'll show you specifically words that work and words that don't work. Let me ask you, do you see the difference between these? Do you see why we would prefer the top list, the one that says use, to the bottom list, don't use? Lena, can you appreciate the difference there? And
thank you for asking the question.
yes.
I guess I find understand a bit different from appreciate. myself, only because appreciate me seems more subjective, while understand to me is like describe or summarize or explain, which are clearer, more concrete, right? Is this what you're looking for?
Well, yes, and still, what I want to do is sort of build on your comment that list and describe are testable, demonstrable, whereas understand happens between your ears. List and describe happen with other people. And so, okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about a talk that you might give sometime. Let's say a business talk, a work talk. And I want you to experiment with writing one behavioral objective for that talk. After your talk, your listeners will be able to, and I want you to name something. Who's ready? Anybody have a sample for us? Lena does. Good.
I have something, but it's a little, it's very related to my job. People might not be able to, I mean, I guess I can still say it, but it has to do with computer science. I'll
Try
say
it out.
it for it.
Try it.
This has to do with something I just did and something I'm going to explain to the rest of my team, but it was, say, after my talk, I was just imagining I gave this talk where people get to use it. And after my talk, my listeners will be able to use the server bootstrap system, be able to use Gradle, be able to better understand Gradle to debug any problems, and migrate from the old server bootstrap system to the new server bootstrap system.
Good. That's fine. Thank you. It's a nice illustration. Now, if you and I were working on this talk together, I would say better to describe something they can do at the moment the talk is finished, rather than something when they're in the office. And so it would be, for instance, name or list or summarize or describe or demonstrate with the intention that downstream to do the other things that you mentioned.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Good, lovely. So I see that my time is coming to an end, and if we were in a workshop environment, we would ordinarily spend an hour on this, and we've spent instead 5 minutes. But I think you get the beginning of the idea. So I want to return to the notion that creating a quiz is also a legitimate option. In fact, in this instance, if you create the quiz, for you, Joseph, for instance, if you create the quiz, then that really is the objective, is for everybody to get an A on the quiz. And then they transfer what they learned into application back on the job. Okay, so I'm going to end that, and I want to get me back to, I want to stop the sharing. How do I, oh, there it is. Got it. Okay. Good. So once again then, the three cornerstones of terrific business talks are service, pleasure, and relationship. Be sure that you give people something that's useful, make it energizing, and make it personal. Connect with them personally. Do those three things, and you're in the ballpark of successful talks. Part of delivering service is this idea of methodically writing behavioral objectives. The reason that my workshop participants love this discipline is because they use it and it works for them. So if you haven't done this previously, try it. It will change your presentations for the better. Thank you very much.